life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk. Oh, it appears as though someone has joined us in the television viewing audience for Life Talk. You've either surfed to or purposely selected this, and it's a weekly series of verbal essays, if you would, about life living and making a living. Now, this evening, we promised everyone that's here that we were going to discuss briefly about what I do, why I do it, how I came to do it. In other words, just the other day, someone called me on the phone, and I had met him in one of the previous performances here at the studio, and he said that he did intranet phone training and had for years in sales, and admitted that he did the traditional stuff, you know, the commonplace, and wondered why I do what I do. He said, why do you do what you're doing? And it's always a little challenging to answer that question without seeming righteous or something. But I said, well, I'm just kind of committed to it and have been for a long, long time. And he said, well, I noticed that somehow you have found a different message. It's unique. I haven't heard it put that way before. And perhaps it's time for a new voice. And, of course, I was complimented and flattered by that. To make my point, it's kind of like I didn't prepare anything for this evening, but I've been preparing for a lot of years for this evening. Frankly, it all started back in 1955. I was stationed in the Trinidad, British West Indies. Had a great tour over there in the Navy, and was transferred to San Diego, California. And in checking in, I realized that they had lost my pay records. And they told me that I wouldn't get paid until they either found the records or reconstructed them from Washington, D.C., and that it could take weeks, even months. And, of course, I was apprehensive. I had a wife and 2 babies and, you know, a life to live. And it was pretty challenging. I was having to borrow money from Navy Relief to make ends meet, and they were pretty secure because they know that someday I was going to get paid, but it's pretty challenging. After a while, I began to look for a spare time, part-time job. I would answer these ads in the paper that would say, earn an extra $1,000 a month part-time without interfering with the job. And that's the same kind of figures that we see in the paper today. That's kind of fascinating when you think about it. This was in 1955. And I'd answer these ads, and guess what they were? Every single one of them were selling jobs. And I was totally unprepared. There's no way that I could sell. And I kept walking away. And I think they were probably satisfied that I did, because, frankly, I obviously was not prepared. I stuttered so bad at that time, and had since I was a child, since around 6 years old. Stuttered so bad I couldn't say my name, couldn't say the name of the products that they were representing, didn't have the clothes to wear, obviously an introvert. And so they kind of waved me off, and I'd go home and look at more ads. One day, there was a knock at the door, and I answered it, and evidently it was a salesperson. And we always welcomed them into our home. My dad had done that, and you know, we tried to honor that too. And this fella came in, and he was selling kitchen knives. Now, I'll bet you, yeah, there's some already know what I'm going to say. It was Cutco. It's a fine kitchen cutlery line. I believe you have some in your home, as I recall, and I know that some of the rest of you do too. I fell in love with that product that day. Wow. I really wanted it for my bride and sweetheart, who she didn't have anything to cook with at all compared to that. And she cooked every day, and she deserved good tools, but there was no way I could make that kind of a decision. And this young fella said, well, why don't you kind of go work for the company, make some extra money, you can get a set of samples for less money. And I figured, no, that's not for me, I just can't sell. He's, oh, you don't have to worry about that in this case, because this product, what? Sells itself, exactly. And I was naive enough to accept that because he wasn't very good at what he was doing. You know what I mean? In other words, he hadn't done the job the cutlery had. And I saw something I wanted, and in spite of him, I was wanting to buy even though I couldn't. Well, he overtured me and invited me to a meeting on Thursday evening. And I guess this was on a Saturday when I first met him, and Sunday, Monday went by, Tuesday, Wednesday, and all kinds of things came up in my mind as to why I shouldn't go to that meeting. It's amazing what the mind will do. And I understand it now, but I didn't then. But somehow or other, I mustered my courage and went to the office, and I pulled up in front and walked up these stairs, and all these guys are in this meeting room, and I kind of sauntered by and peeked in and went down the end of the hall and turned around and sauntered back down and kind of peeked in this way. And I was looking for the guy who'd invited me, and I never did see him. Never did see him. I managed to get into the room, found a seat, and I was impressed. I mean, they were singing songs and passing out money and trophies, and they were having a great time. And I thought, wow, this is really something. I think maybe I could try this. And they invited me back to a Saturday morning meeting. And this guy wasn't at that meeting either. I have never seen him since. Been looking for him, but to give him a big hug and to thank him for introducing me into an environment that has been delightful all these years. But Saturday morning I went, it was the same kind of meeting. I mean, it was razzle-dazzle, and everybody was excited, and they were supposed to take me out in the field and show me how to do it. And no one would take me out. You know, they was busy. I realized later that most of them weren't going to go to work. You know, they come to the meeting, get all fired up, and then they go have coffee and go pick up their wife and go shopping or whatever it happens to be. The manager said, well, do you think you could sell this stuff? And what do you say? No? I said, well, sure. And so he loaned me a sample kit. I thought he was the greatest guy in the world because I didn't have the money to pay the bond fee that was necessary to make a deposit on the kit. But he loaned me the sample kit and a selection of prizes or gifts to give away at the door because it's supposed to be a door-to-door thing. Boy, I couldn't wait to get started. Couldn't wait to get started. And I packed up the car and loaded up and everything and got in and wrote down the odometer reading because I wanted to do it right for the Internal Revenue, and took off and couldn't wait to get started. And I drove and I drove and I just couldn't wait to get started. And then I can't do this, I quit. And so I kind of rehired myself and drove some more and quit again, rehired myself. Did that about 6 times and made some crazy promises. Like I remember one time I put the car in neutral, and I promised myself that when it's kind of coasted to a stop, I would hit on the closest door, and it got almost to a standstill, and I jumped it into gear and took off. And then I remember absurd. I promised myself I could find a yellow house with purple shutters. I would knock on that door. And I drove and I drove, and darn if I didn't find one. Couldn't believe it. And who wants to knock on a yellow house with purple shutters? And so this went on for 189 city miles, 6 hours of driving, frozen, locked up inside that car, not able to function. Finally, I did quit. I was on my way home, and I knew my wife would pat me on the poo-poo and send me back with the samples, and that'd be the end of that career. And something went off inside of me. I got really angry. Oh, I got upset. I realize now, after all these years, that what I did, I slipped into a fight mode. You see, when you're in a fear place, you tend to fight, flee, or freeze. And I had been frozen inside that car, and I'd been fleeing all over San Diego, California. But on the way home, it was over. I mean, I really needed the money. I needed to do something, and there was so much stress, so much angst there, that I slipped into a fight mode, and I decided I was going to knock on a door, and if they gave me any trouble, I'd knock their darn head off. Because I could do that. I'd been a heavyweight fighter in the Navy and what have you. Stopped the car, knocked on this door, and I'm not going to discuss that call. Inept, inadequate, I think maybe even inappropriate. But I found someone who evidently needed a set of kitchen cutlery because they did everything they could to help me write up the order, gave me some money, and I floated out of that house. I knew I was a salesperson. You know what I mean? I knew it. And jumped in the car and drove all the way home to celebrate. See, what I'd been doing early in the morning was isolating. You know what I mean? Now I was celebrating. Had a sale, all the way home, and I had lunch and Well, actually dinner by then. By then. And my wife finally had the audacity to suggest that I do what? Yeah, go out and get another one. Like it was easy or something. So there I was in the car driving around again. But I did stop the car again. And in fact, I stopped it 4 times before 10 o'clock that night, and actually got 4 sales. I was supposed to call the office that night, and I did. And they couldn't understand how I could get $4.95. The trimmer was $3.45, and one of the other knives was $6.75. And manager said, "How did you get $4.95?" I said, "$495." And boy, did they celebrate. They made too much of it. Probably shouldn't have done that. It's the best day I ever had in 6 years in Cutco. But I was committed. I was committed. Had a taste, a flavor of the free enterprise system, freedom, punch your own clock, create your own design. Boy, it was wonderful. However, this is the best day I had. And the subsequent 2 years were overwhelming. Very, very difficult. A lot of times I would leave a home, unable to communicate, unable to say what was in my heart and head, and would sob in the car, trying to reduce the stress that came from being mocked, perhaps for stuttering, or people not understanding. And boy, it was tough. I did have a knack for recruiting. I recruited a few people, was able to assist them in getting started. Made a few dollars in override, they call it. And totally in love with the process, though. I really fell in love with the free enterprise system. Came 1957. I was about ready to get out of the military. I wanted to go full-time, but it was an irrational choice to make. At that time, there was about 1,500 managers with Alcoa, and I was around 1,200, plus or minus any given week or month. Not a very good standing. I kind of justified that and say, well, I was the only part-timer in the system, but let's face it, that did not justify getting out of the military, giving up retirement, medical benefits, and all the rest of that. Had a young associate, not even a close friend, saw my dilemma and said, "I'd like to introduce you to a couple of people." And he took me in his car to a bookstore. And that day he bought me a recording. It was called The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. If you haven't heard it, it's available out here. Perhaps you can check Conant Nightingale or maybe the Franklin Time Management store at your local mall. Somewhere out there it's available, The Strangest Secret. Awesome. I listened to that recording over and over again, along with reading a book called I Can by Dr. Ben Sweetland. I heard things I'd never heard, and it was inspiring and facilitating, stimulating. But something came to me during this period in a flash that wasn't on the record or in the book. It was a realization, I call it now a psychic shift, a realization that what I had been doing for the first quarter century of my life was reacting to circumstances and accommodating conditions. Now, that's a pretty natural thing to be doing, because I look around my life today and I see at least 97% of the people that I know just as unconsciously as I'd been doing it. We certainly can't indict it because it's a pretty natural thing. However, I realize I never had to do that again unless I chose to. That rather than reacting to circumstances, I could become a circumstance. Now, as I could become causative instead of being at effect. I could initiate instead of accommodate. And I could establish conditions that other people would probably accommodate because it's their nature to do so. With that shift, somehow a recapturing of the initiative factor, in 90 days, I was #1 internationally with the same company. Same product, same price, same car, same wife. Everything was exactly the same, except this mental maneuver that had occurred. At that point, I wondered how many other things there must be that we didn't understand. Because in 1957, I looked around and I saw otherwise capable people not doing very well in the free enterprise system. I began to research, and I found then, and we find that the numbers are pretty stable even today, the fact that of all the people who go into business for themselves, 90% of them will fail in the first 5 years. Another 90% fail in the second 5, leaving a net gain of about 4% new businesses starting up every decade in our country. Not very good record. Also, we know that 80% of the results of any communal environment, 80% of the results, the activity, comes out of only 20% of the people involved. That's true in your church, it's true at work, true in the marketplace. 80% of the results coming out of 20% of the people. It's called Pareto's formula. He was an Italian philosopher and mathematician, and he established this. But it's not chiseled in granite. It's not chiseled in granite. It can be invented if we understand some of the basic premises that we're teaching. In creative direct selling, and I include in that real estate, life insurance, what we're doing, certainly vacuum cleaners and cookware and cutlery and fuller brush and that kind of thing. It's even more challenging. In other words, 90% of the results are coming out of only 10% of the people. Again, this doesn't indict creative direct selling, but I think what it does, it must cause us to wonder why we're not better prepared. Because those who do accomplish seem to do it quite easily. It's not an extraordinary thing at all. 90-10 is not good, though. And then in multi-level marketing, which is spawning more millionaires than any other industry on the face of the planet, it's 97-3. That's 97% of the money and the results are coming out of only 3% of the people. Not very good. Only 3% of our population becomes financially independent. Good news there is that about 1 out of every 200 Americans are millionaires. I don't know if you ever thought about it that way or not, but it's true. 1 out of every 200 Americans are millionaires. There's about 150,000 new young millionaires every year spawned in America under the age 35, and 58% of them are women. So there's a new trend out here, and good luck to them. You see, this is in spite of all this mainstream information that I've heard since 1955, actually. There's a whole lot of things that are being said and taught, admonishments, if you would, cliches, that are given to us as rules to succeed by. In other words, how often might it be said by someone, sweetheart, if you're going to be successful and happy and fulfilled, you're going to have more self-confidence. That's a pretty common thing, isn't it? Or they'll say self-esteem is important, and you got to keep working on your self-improvement. And or they'll say things like practice makes perfect, and forgive and forget. See it big and keep it simple. Don't take no for an answer. It's that kind of information has given these kind of results. And you figure, well, wait a minute. Stop it. Whoa, let's take another look. Let's take another look at this. So in 57, I stepped outside that mainstream and took an obtuse position about everything. Sometimes, only on occasion, I've been called a contrarian, that I just, I'm contrary about things. Well, no, I'm obtuse. In other words, I don't deny any of this. I've enjoyed it, benefited from it, and I appreciate it. And a lot of my co-contributors, big names that you would recognize if I mentioned them, are doing this kind of thing and doing it well and having an impact, there's no question. However, there has to be another message somewhere, a message that would help some of these people move up in this direction. Okay? Help some of these people move up in that direction and provide information for these people to assist them in doing so. And that was information that these people can convey. Because I'll tell you, my experience is that a lot of these people are real serious about helping. They want more success. This is a minority that's in jeopardy all the time. They want more successful people, but sometimes even they don't know what they've done that's different. What they've done that's different. And so this has been the quest. In all of this, I began to realize the vocabulary has a lot to do with success. See, the more words that we have in our vocabulary, the better we think, because we think with words. Okay? So the bigger the vocabulary, the better we think. The better we think, the better choices that we can make. Now we have to have some consciousness of grammar in order to communicate effectively. Grammar. And this is a fairly natural thing. It's not natural when they ask you to diagram sentences and what have you, but children, a child might have 10 or 20 words in their vocabulary, and they string them together in such a way to make sense. This is a natural thing. What seems to make the difference, what we, I think, should be more conscious of, is semantics. Semantics. See, vocabulary is about definition and spelling, meanings. Semantics is the psychic impact that a word has on us. It's more about derivation. Where did that word come from? What was the guttural sound that originated that word, and what were they up to about that? What was that about? Semantics. And so, out of this, I began to realize that there were a lot of Qwertyuiops in our lives. Qwertyuiops. If I can, I think I'm going to take a new point here. Qwertyuiops. Now, a Qwertyuiop, by my definition, is an admonition, an aphorism, a cliche that's intended to stimulate, to inspire, to encourage, to uplift. Okay? Which in reality, however, tends to demean and to diminish. It can backfire on us. For example, we're going to take some of these phrases that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to identify them as Qwertyuiops, and look at them and their intent, and then see how else we might express this for better results. We're going to start out with this idea of self-confidence. We've heard that before. I'm going to spend some time on this. It's rather interesting. We do a socioeconomic review with a lot of people, and have done thousands and thousands of them across the country, throughout the hemisphere actually. And we've asked an awful lot of people, you've heard about self-confidence. Where is your self-confidence level from 0 to 100? And people kind of look at us funny. I mean, it's universal. They look at you for a minute and they say, well, and then usually you can see that mind working and that little scale moving up and down, and then they usually say, well, that depends. Say, no, depending on what? What are we doing here? Are we warming up peas for supper, or are we standing in the doorway of an airplane ready to jump out for the first time? Okay, in other words, it's a nebulous thing, self-confidence. And we're saying that it's bad languaging. For example, if you say to a young person or to anybody, look, you're just going to have more self-confidence. And if they don't have whatever that is, and there's a sense of that, they probably will not move forward. You know what I mean? In other words, if that's what you got to have, and I don't feel that I have it, whatever that is, then I have a problem. Okay? What I'm saying is it's not good language. Self-esteem is an interesting thing. People talk about that all the time, self-esteem. Esteem is important, but self-esteem we have to examine pretty carefully. Esteem seems to be a reflection of that we grant. In other words, if you give people esteem, chances are you're going to receive your due. It's kind of fascinating. In the beginning, a child, from the time they're born until they're 2 or 3 years old, totally dependent upon the adults in its life in order to give it its esteem. And after that, they begin to participate in some way, and it can make a difference. I can remember some years ago, I had a grandson who was introduced to a man. I think David was probably 7. And he was introduced to a man named Paul Russell, we'll call him. And he was taught to say, how do you do, Mr. Russell, and shake his hands and what have you. And Mr. Russell said, Mr. Russell's my dad. You can just call me Paul. I understand his intention. But we got him aside very quickly, and we said, Paul, will you go ahead and tell David, probably it's better if you call me Mr. Russell. And he said, why? I said, well, he needs that. He needs that. And you stop and think about it. If you're surrounded with young people and there is self-improvement, somewhat being challenged as being in the industry, and yet to take that to task is rather interesting, I think, but it's not good languaging. There is no such thing as self-improvement. Brain's not equipped to educate itself. It's dependent upon other brains and the experiences that they have had. In other words, you take a little baby and you put it in a dimly lit room with no stimuli and feed it tasteless pablum for 20 years, what's going to come out of that room? You know, a somewhat mature body with a baby brain in it. I mean, nothing's going to happen. It's the stimuli, the inspiration that we get from day to day, from our surroundings and from people that can make that difference. Another analogy is you take 100 of the most intelligent men in the world, and you put them in a room, and you feed them and let them toilet and bathe and what have you, but no communicating. They can't talk, no writing notes, no sign language. What's going to come out of that room in 90 days? Same people that went in it. You know, maybe less, because if you don't use it, you'll lose it, you know. Self-improvement. This is a challenge. What I call them semantical faux pas. These are Qwertyuiops, okay? Why? The difficulty is in the word self. And what we're going to do, I'm going to invite you back for next week. And we're going to examine this more closely. And as we progress through we're going to identify more means and the derivation of the word, where it all started out. In the meantime, if you'd like to join us in a live concert, don't hesitate to call us. Be at the end of the show. We have you a ticket or two so you can enjoy it with someone. But meanwhile, go make it a nice day for someone. That way 2 people would have had a nice day. Thanks.